Okay, I believe we are on live. Okay, anyone's out there, give me a holler so I know that I am talking to someone and not just to myself. I sometimes do talk to myself, I admit it, but not publicly. So, if you were out there, we didn't advertise this too much, but we did mention, and I hope that everything is working. Let me see if our mic seems to be working. Yeah, hopefully that is working. And if you were out there, give me a holler so I know you're there. Meantime, we're going to start talking about, someone's there. Who's there? Good to see you. Good to see you. Very nice. Welcome. Ron and Ingrid, good to have you guys here. Okay, so I want to speak about a fascinating concept that comes up from this past week's Torah portion. And it is the concept you can't hear. That's not good. Let's see. Can you hear me now? Ingrid, tell me if you could hear me now. Never mind, you hear now? That means good, you're hearing me. Okay. All right, if you're not hearing, please tell me. Great, okay, wonderful. Okay, so, let me just close the door. Yes, okay. So now, good to see you, Albert. So, I want to talk about this concept of the red heifer. The red heifer is a fascinating law. There are places in the world that are searching for this red heifer. It is a cow, a red cow that will not have two black hairs on it, totally red. Never been used in any way. And this will be used as the process of creating the ashes of the red heifer, which will be used to purify people from the impurity of the dead. Very hard to understand that because we don't know what that is, the impurity of the dead. We know coming in contact with the dead creates impurity, but we don't really understand what that is. But I want to just tell you something that the mystics tell us, that if a person is purified from this impurity of the dead, it's like a veil being lifted over their heads, and they're going to be able to see the world and understand the world clearly, which we don't because we're spiritually numbed. Now, when that happens, there's going to be a change in the world, a dramatic change. And what will happen is when they find the ashes of the red heifer, people will be pure and they will be able to do the service on the Temple Mount. The temple. Good to see you, Christy. And so that is obviously a world-altering moment when people can enter onto the Temple Mount to bring the offerings, to do the service, the carbon paste of the Paschal Lamb, and other things. So obviously, besides it being politically whatever it is, spiritually it is a moment that when we are worthy of finding this red heifer, it will happen. It's not going to happen on its own. Not going to happen because you were careful with your sheep and with your cows. It's a spiritual moment when the red heifer will be discovered. It'll be the seventh of the red heifers. Moshe had the first one, and there were ones that were throughout the ages that were created. I've shared this with many people before, but apparently Vendel Jones, who was a Noahide, he was a non-Jewish person who believed in the 7 Noahide laws and lived a righteous life based on that. He was a archaeologist in Israel, and he had many digs. He used to go digging and finding various artifacts. There was a rumor for a while that I had heard from various people that were connected that he had a map where he claimed he knew where the ashes of the red heifer were hidden. Because the reality is that the ashes of the red heifer, although they use some of it for the Kohanim, some for the people, there was a part of it that was left over as a testimony, and all the subsequent ashes of the red heifer that would be used started with this one back from what Moshe made. So he had a map where he claimed that according to this, he knew where the ashes of the red heifer were found in a certain place he wanted to dig. And apparently the Israeli Antiquities Department wouldn't let him dig there. Okay, true, maybe not true, I don't know. But I understand that politically it would cause what it would cause, and some people are afraid of that. It shouldn't be. But spiritually also, we would need to be worthy to get this ashes of the red heifer to purify people from the impurity of the dead. Now, impurity in this way is so hard to talk about. We don't understand what this looks like. We don't understand what it means. Everyone in ancient times, in biblical times, in times where the Jews were in the land of Israel during temple times, they maintained all these laws of purity, which means they couldn't come in contact with certain dead animals and certain dead rodents and dead people and various many aspects of it, and they had to function that way. And that was a very, very sensitive spiritual sensitivity that we essentially have lost today because we lack the ability to purify ourselves. There's certain purifications that still happen to a certain degree. Like, for example, the mikvah. The mikvah is a natural body of water. There are different kinds of mikvahs, but a natural body of water of a certain size, enough that a human being would be able to go inside of it. A stream was called living waters, and that doesn't need that full amount, but it has to go over the person entirely. But generally speaking, a natural body of water, it's never been in a vessel. And one of the rationales of it is that when you look at the beginning of creation, it says that waters covered the earth. Obviously, it's not the beginning of everything because there was earth and water. So there's before that. But the beginning process says the waters covered the earth in the beginning of creation. And therefore, one of the concepts is when a person goes into a mikvah water, purified water, meaning water that has never been in a vessel, it's a natural body of water, they submerge there, they go into a time, they go like in a time portal where they go back to the beginning of creation when water surrounded everything, and they're immersed in that water. When they come out, they restart. That's why people convert to Judaism. They go into a mikvah. A woman after her menstrual period, she goes to the mikvah. She's recreated, and there's a new level after going into the purifying waters, the natural body of water, which is why water in general, we feel that it is purifying in some degree. But whatever we do, we don't have the ashes of the red heifer. And everyone has come in contact with the dead in some kind of way, either gone to a funeral or touched someone else that is in contact or whatever it is. So we need this ash of the red heifer to be purified and to have our sort of minds opened up and expanded to understand the world in the way it really is, in the deeper sense, without the veils and blocks that prevent us. Now, but when you look at the story of the ash of the red heifer, it is very strange. It is one of the laws that are called a chok. A chok is translated as a law we don't understand the reasons for. We can't explain it. As a matter of fact, King Shlomo, King Solomon, who is the wisest of all men, he said, I said I will become wise. I tried to understand this commandment, and I couldn't. It was beyond me. So the wisest of all men, King Solomon, tried to understand the explanation of the red heifer, and he couldn't get it. Too far away, too hard to understand, could not understand it. Now, what was so perplexing about the law of the red heifer? Well, the main thing they say is that the people that prepared the red heifer, because they burnt this red cow, and then they had to take the ashes, put it into the water, and do various components to this whole process of making the ashes of the red heifer, mixing it with a certain kind of water, a certain kind of vessel. All the people who did this process, from the one who slaughtered it, to the one who burnt it, the whole thing, they all became impure. And then when that water is sprinkled on somebody else, they become pure. So if you tell me something is whatever, somehow spiritually, emotionally, whatever, it's purifying, then it's purifying. It's not. How could the same entity do both? How could the same quality of something that would make people impure make the same thing, make them pure? The commentaries do talk about it. They give some explanations. They talk about the idea that's part of the depth of taking the middle path. Sometimes you have to know to the extremes, and sometimes healthy food. Medicine, which is health, is what a sick person needs to have. That same food might make a healthy person sick. So the commentaries do talk about it, but somehow the deeper sense, even if we can give some explanation, the deeper sense is we don't really understand how the red heifer happens, how it makes people pure. Good to see you, Steve. Welcome. And this is what's called a chok. Now, there are these types of commandments that are chokim. Chokim are good from Australia. Wonderful. Glad to see you. Beautiful. So chokim are these things that we can't really understand. Civil laws you can get. Don't steal, don't kill. Okay, the Torah gives a whole deeper way of understanding. It's never the same way, just don't kill and don't steal, because we don't understand. Embarrassing someone in public is like killing them. You see, what happens? Their face gets red. They get and then they get pale. So it means the blood rushes there, and it's like a form of killing them. Stealing, also not paying a worker that is a daily work, not paying on time. It's also a problem of some type of stealing. So there are many, many components, but civil laws, we can make sense. There are some laws that we don't really get. And I want to talk about today why we need those. Why do we need these chukim, these laws that are beyond? And why the ash of the red heifer has to be the quintessential chok, the quintessential law, statute we don't really understand. I want to posit as an aside, as the mystics say, the Kabbalists say, that really, in a certain sense, all the laws are chukim. All the laws you don't really get. The word chok really literally means to be engraved. And the commentaries say it's like in the heavens, what it represents is engraved in the highest place. And it has permutations and it has manifestations in this physical world. And therefore you understand a little bit about it, but you don't really understand the deeper reasons for that, because you'd have to understand the whole essence of everything. And those who actually learn the Torah understand that every commandment, good to see you, Sam. Every commandment has infinite depth, way beyond human being could understand. We understand some of it. But I want to talk a little bit today about the ash of the red heifer. Why that? What's that about? Why does it have to be a law we don't really understand? Why do we need these laws in the first place? And why this is the quintessential law we don't understand? Chok, the ash of the red heifer, which purifies somebody from the impurity of death. So I want to explain. Okay. Now, I first want to just maybe bring up one topic. I mentioned this in one of the classes recently, and what I'm going to say now, I know most of the people on this feed right now, but what I'm going to say won't frustrate you, but for many people it will be extremely frustrating. All right, let's play this game. I say to a person, okay, how do you know what's right and wrong? Okay. So some people say, well, because I have a sense of morality and I believe this is right, this is moral. Now I say to you, wait a minute, I disagree. Person says, I think killing is wrong. Somebody else says, I think killing is not wrong. Now, how do you actually prove, we all know killing is wrong, how do you prove to the person killing is not wrong? Well, you try various things. The guy says, listen, go look at the animal kingdom. Right? This was really, Hitler, Yamach Shemo, which got it from Nietzsche, the Ubermensch, the Superman. The lion kills the lamb. So when you try to argue with someone about what is moral, you can have a problem. Because as you press them to say what is moral, they're going to say, well, I think no, I think this. And you're going to have a hard time convincing them. Because if they say, well, I think that the strong should kill the weaker, well, you'll say, well, no, that's not good. Well, he doesn't agree with that. So people always come on to this thing called social contract. Social contract is the idea that, well, you don't want me to steal from you, I don't want you to steal from me, so we have a social contract. But as I mentioned a couple weeks ago, that only works for the weaker, because the stronger person says, well, I'm not afraid you're going to steal from me, because I'm stronger. So they will abrogate, they will remove the social contract. And then how do you lock somebody in to agree to morality, right? Which is why you need, police, and you need officers, you need people to maintain that people act accordingly. Because if a guy comes along and says, I don't believe in it, how are you going to convince him otherwise? The truth is, the only way to convince someone of what is morally true is if they believe in an objective morality from an outside source. Meaning, if you believe there's a God, then God could say, this is right and this is wrong. If you don't believe in that, then you'll never be able to be convinced that something is immoral. And it's so disturbing. But if you go to a cannibal and you say, it's wrong to eat people, he's going to say, what are you talking about? That's dinner. That's where we live. Because for them, they're going to say, this is what I believe is morally true. You know it's not true. How do you know it's not true? Well, the way people know it's not true is because a person has a neshama, has a soul. And the soul is the barometer that tunes you in to things that are correct. But what people do is they cover up that barometer. If a person was trained very badly and had a bad education, so they may not know that something is wrong. Now, they still could figure it out because it is in the barometer of the person. But as they get used to silencing that voice, they can silence it. They can create philosophies to go and to tell them otherwise. But without an objective objective morality, where there is a source that determines this is right and wrong, you'll never ever convince somebody because they're going to say, well, this is what I think. And logically, you can't. You can't convince them. There's no way. The lion eats the lamb. The cannibal says this is dinner. I don't agree with you. Good luck. Even though I do grant that the truth is the soul does sense it. That's why most people will agree to it. And that's why some of the philosophers, Kant and other philosophers will say, oh, there is an inbuilt component of the person. But it only is because there is a concept that there is an outside source, a creator, who determines right and wrong. When a person wants to determine right and wrong themselves, they got a problem on their hands. Okay? And that's why it's an amazing thing. I've shared this with you many times, but Aristotle was looked upon by the sages in different ways. Maimonides appreciated Aristotle. And I mean, I think I would appreciate him. He was a brilliant person. And Maimonides says, he used his mind to he didn't have Torah, he didn't have prophecy, he couldn't get to this level. But as far as the human intellect, he just went as far as a person just using their raw intellect could go in a certain sense. Nachmanides didn't have the same feeling about Aristotle. And he always called him the cursed Aristotle. That's how he started his sentence about it. Why did he call him the cursed Aristotle? Because he says he's the person that can only believe what his mind can dictate. That's a dangerous thing. Because now I say, well, my mind understands this, and this is true. And that's why Aristotle didn't do experiments. He sat in his armchair, and he thought about the way the world should be. Meantime, quantum physics does not fit into logic. But it happens to be that there's truth to quantum physics because God's logic is above what you understand as logic. Okay, so this is the idea of a person has to understand where there's a certain place that you can know certain things, and there's a certain place where you don't. And you are connecting to something above yourself. Now let's go back to the story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. What happens in the Garden of Eden? So the serpent comes up with a certain approach that is so powerful, it speaks to every single human being. And what is that? He says, V'yisem kelokim. If you go and you eat the tree of knowledge of good and evil, you'll be like God. Now, there are different ways to relate to the source. One way is to go and to say, I want to be connected to the source. And that in Hebrew, there's different terms of connections of words. There's le, which means to, me is from, and be is in, with. So you can have connection to the source by realizing you come from God, realizing you're going to God, realizing you're within. But in all of those concepts and all those words that have a connective words, I am connecting to the source. There's another word in Hebrew, though, that is another phrase that is ki. Ki means like. Okay? Like. And that's another phrase that can be connected to a word. So the snake says, the serpent says to Adam, you could be ki Elokim, like God. Ooh, wait a minute. Now that's a little different. Because to be like someone is different in different ways. If a child says, Lopiat's a beautiful idea. If a child says, I am like my father because I have his genes, I am like my rabbi because I learned Torah from him, then I emulate them because I come from them. But to say I am like something could also mean, well, they're them and I'm like them. I'm equal. I'm my own boss. And that was the attraction of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. V'yisem kelokim, that you will be like God. You will not be subservient to anything else. And this spoke to Adam and Eve because this was the idea of the highest part of a person, the mind, the dot, the knowledge, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. It wasn't a tree of knowledge of evil. It was a tree of knowledge of seeing good, seeing evil, and you're the one to decide. And that's very crucial. Because that is the job of a person. A person who lacks ambition says, you know what, I'm not going to try, whatever, what am I? They won't go anyplace. God put into human being the desire to strive to be great. It's an essential component that everybody wants. And we get beaten down in life sometimes and we lose that. And that's not good. Because the way it's natural to want to strive to be the greatest things that we could be. That is called our service. That's what we're built. Now people misdirect it. It'll be all towards, his job and nothing to do with his spiritual growth. Okay. I understand that it gets misplaced, but it's an essential component of a human being. And the highest part of the person is the head. That's why it's on top. So when the serpent says to Adam and Chava, you could be like God with this understanding of knowledge, then that's very attractive. I'm not going to be told to do what I got to do. I'm going to know myself. I'm my own boss. And and Adam and Eve didn't have bad intention. There's a certain place where they felt that if I could decide, then I could really make a greater impact. But it was off. It had that danger of not like I am like my father, like I have his genes, but I am like him who needs them. And that danger, that small place where it was enticing to be that independent person from the source, that was the place where Adam and Eve got knocked off. And it's in the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Because knowledge means that I am something. I know something. That is the place where a human being, most of all, can feel like, wow, I studied, I have understanding. What happens once they eat the tree of knowledge of good and evil? So it says in the commentaries that when they were tam, they were pure with God, they were following God, they would have lived forever. Once they separated and they said, no, I'll be my own source. The word tam, pure with God, when you flip the letters around, it spells the word met. Met means death. They brought death into the world. How? I'll tell you very simply. Because when you take a plug and you put it into the socket, that appliance can just keep going. Because it's tuned into the source. If I give you a battery, however good the battery is, there's a point where the battery will wear out. So when Adam and Eve were plugged into the source, they were tam, they were pure, they were connected, like all the other connection letters in Hebrew, be, le, and me, from, to, with, and in. And they were connected, they would live forever. When they disconnected and they said, I am going to be like, but I'm going to be separate, death was brought into the world. That's why the letters flip around and spell the word death. Now, they were given a battery. Okay? You could last on your own 120 years, whatever it is. Adam and Eve had their own time frame, but whatever it is for human beings today, that's what it is. The secret to eternal life is connecting back to the source. Okay, for various reasons, that is not going to happen in this world as it is. It can happen in the future. Now let's understand the red heifer and why it specifically has to be outside our frame of das, of knowledge, of understanding. Why? Because as long as it's within, the problem that brought death into the world was the understanding that I am the one who dictates what's right and wrong. You know, hey, listen, if I can go and be such a righteous person that I'll do good things, how much greater will I be if I decide what's right and wrong too? I'm really righteous now. No, sorry. It doesn't work that way. Because, as I told you in the beginning, now all you've done is you've made yourself your own God, and you have your own bodies and your own things. It has to be outside the system. You can be righteous when what is dictated as what is moral and appropriate is from the source of all, and it is beyond. It's not subjective to what you want. That is now the ash of the red heifer. Because why? Because I don't get it. There's a place in me where I fix up the problem of death by admitting, acknowledging, and understanding. There is a place where I, by definition, can't go. Life is given by God. There is no book on how to make life. The Sefer Yetzirah talks about how to build a golem, how to build this spiritual sort of, but life itself, that's in God's hands. Okay? You could become a doctor and learn how to heal people. Once they're dead, you don't go and say, okay, listen, do something to bring them back to life. Because it's outside of your framework. And if you don't realize that, then we're disconnected from the source of life. And that is why specifically some commandments have to be chokim, because some commandments have to take you outside of your framework. And I want to tell you something that I believe very strongly. As I told you earlier, some of the Kabbalists really say that all commandments have a certain aspect of being chokim you don't understand. You know why? Because you learn something. Listen, I learned this commandment of sending away the mother bird, and it helps me become a compassionate person. Very good. And you read it and you say, wow, you know what? This Torah is very, very smart. I really like this. I want to do this. God's very, very smart. He agrees with everything I think. So what did you just do? You just became God. You decided what God should think. By definition, it has to be that there's places that you can't understand. Otherwise, you're the arbiter. Otherwise, you're stuck. I'm going to get a bunch of questions. I'm going to just finish the point. I'm going to come back to these questions. Just write the questions down. I'll get back to them. So by definition, there has to be a certain place in a human being where they understand something's outside. That is the ash of the red heifer. Now, This is the example that they bring in the commentaries. They say, well, what is this real Ash of the Red Heifer? The Jews sinned on the sin of the golden calf. It's like an example of a baby that went and messed up the king's palace. So what happened? They said to the mother, hey, you come and clean it up. So comes along the Ash of the Red Heifer and it cleans up the sin of the golden calf. I mean, it's strange. And you know why it's specifically strange? Because there's a principle in Jewish law that the prosecutor can't be the defender. So, for example, when we blow the shofar, we don't blow a shofar that's made out of about a horn of a cow, because that would be a reminder of the sin of the golden calf. So why here will the ash of the red heifer be used to fix up the sin of the golden calf when it should be the same thing? And the answer is like this, because it doesn't say here that the golden calf will fix up the golden calf. It says the mother. And what does that show you? That shows you that you go back to the source. Okay? The whole problem here was that people created their own reality, believing that this is true and I know better. The way to fix up the death that came into the world by Adam and reestablish in the world by the sin of the golden calf, because if they wouldn't have done the sin of the golden calf, they would have returned to that period. But what happened? When Moses didn't come down and started saying, what's going to happen? Oh no. And we need to figure out something to do. I know God told us not to do this, not to do that, but we need to figure out something. So again, the mind of a human being, which is the pinnacle of a human being and why it becomes great, had to come up and make its own approach, even against what God had said. That's why they brought death back into the world. How do you fix it up right now? You realize that you are a very intelligent person. You have a mind. It's amazing. But it is what it is because it's plugged into the source. And therefore, when you realize that this is what your understanding is, you could connect to higher understandings. When it's only you, it's whatever you know from your limited intelligence, from your limited time in this earth, in the period of time you were created and born, and all the social things around you that tell you this is right and wrong and all the understandings. But when you understand that your highest part is connected beyond that to the source, and that's where you get your wisdom from, then you really can tune in to eternity. You can live forever. You can remove death from the world. That is the power of the red heifer. Can we explain it? Maybe. But the deeper understanding of it you can't get. Because a deeper understanding requires to understand the principle that it's not in your limited context. It's where you hook in to the infinite and you go on and on and on. And as long as you're plugged in, that appliance can go forever. You're plugged in, you can go higher, higher, higher. You cut it off, that's what you know. That's how it fixes up. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's a very, very deep idea. I know I think about it a lot. I share with some people. When I got to Israel, when I was 21, after college, I went to Israel and I worked in yeshiva for many years. So I remember, there was one commandment that it really didn't make sense to me. It just kind of went against my emotional feelings of the things that I thought were right as a youngster. And then I remember I said at a certain point, there's so much wisdom in everything, you can do everything. So I did it. And as that happened, I understood it in a deeper way than I would have before. It made perfect sense to me. But from only I decided to do it, did I really understand it? Because my mind was limited, and this went against my understanding. Now, of course, until when a person knows the Torah is true and they realize it's from God, then they can rely on it. When a person goes to a doctor, if he knows the doctor's really good, at a certain point he doesn't say, well, tell me exactly how this medicine works before I'll take it, and I need to study all of the medical books because they know the doctor's really good. And doctors are limited because they're people. Certainly when a person realizes the Torah is true and it comes from the infinite source, that when he doesn't understand something and he still hooks into it, he realizes he's hooking into that infinite wisdom. And the truth is that itself will help him get the understanding of it. That's my thought, and I have some questions here I'm going to try to relate to. Steve asks, how can we are virtual beings, make sure our day is used for God? It's a good question. It's a good question. It's a good question. So, and we're speaking to a diverse crowd here, and so everyone's really in a different place. There's the obligation the Jews have to learn Torah really all day and all night. So a person can learn, 24 hours a day. As a Jew, he should do that. Some people do, some people can't. I'll tell you in a Jewish perspective, we say the following, and I'm going to expand this to everyone, to Noachites and to everybody. So there is a law. It says that someone who's Jewish has to learn Torah day and night. Day and night. Okay, so how do you do day and night? All right, there's different explanations. Maybe you do it in the morning, but it seems really to be it's a 24-hour job. Now, there are times where people can't do that. Guy needs to work. Guy needs to do this. Needs to do that. He even needs to sometimes relax to be able to get his strength up to do more mitzvot. So what do? You have to set up your day where the pinnacle of what you're going to do is going to be a spiritual pursuit. So, for example, let's say a person is doing a job. Chanoch, who was one of the righteous people in the early times of the earth, it says he was a shoemaker. So one explanation, it says that he used to go and unify Kabbalistically God's name while he was making the shoe. Okay, so some people learn that literally, and that he was doing actions, but he had a much deeper understanding of what he was doing. One of the great Mussar rabbis says, well, that's very hard to understand, because when you're hired by somebody, the law is you have to focus on doing your work. You can't really be doing something else. So he says what he was doing was, when he was doing his job, he was doing it so intently on doing it properly, not to rip somebody off, to give people what they paid for, to not to waste time if he was working on the clock, to if he was working as a contract, to make sure he sold the best product, what was worth what he did. And that itself, says this Mussar sage, that was unifying God in it's a deep way, because he did it in the right context. So there's two ways to think about how your day should work where it's lined up properly. One is, if you need to do things that are the mundane things that people need to do in life, you should think that whatever I'm doing, I want it to be done to make the world a better place as God wants it to be. So if you're making shoes, you say, okay, it is a mitzvah not to steal, not to deprive someone of something, and therefore I'm going to avoid that by doing the best job I could do. Now it's a mitzvah. Also, you say, wait a minute, there's kindness. I want to make the best pair of shoes so people will feel better. Let me tell you something. With all the riots and protests, if anyone thought the way we're saying right now, the world would be a fine place. Fine place. People thought when they did whatever job they did to go and to say, I want to do as God's commanded to make this world a better place. We live righteously and make the world a better place as he commanded. That'd be amazing. Now, sometimes you're doing jobs that are difficult to see that. The second thing to do is, when you do your work, see it as a process to lead to when you can do a spiritual act. And that's how they explain the idea that even though, let's say, a Jew is commanded to learn Torah all day, if he can't, so he knows he's got, let's say, I don't know, an hour, 2, 3, whatever, at night to do it. So everything he's doing in his day is a preparation for the spiritual act. And that's something that everyone could do. So what I would say is, when a person is doing their acts, first have kavanah, intent, that this act is meant to, whatever I'm doing, is meant to make the world a better place as God has commanded. And you'll find it has a fulfillment in one of the commandments. That's the first thing. Second thing is, if you have to be stuck in mundane things you don't want to do, you could still think that. You could still think, even if you're doing something that you don't like to do, it feels very, very mundane. But you say, okay, God wants me to do this, and I'm doing this to make the world better. And then to have that be a build-up to a part of the day where you can have spiritual pursuits in prayer, in learning, in other things, that this is sort of a lead-up to a moment where you're going to do other spiritual pursuits also. That's how I'd answer that question. Hope that helps, Steve. All right. Elbert has a question. If Adam and Eve did become connected and would have lived forever, like you said, but what about the existence of everyone? Did Hashem create all the souls that will have be or will be? Yeah, it's a very good question. So, a very deep question. Let's see what Sam has said. Mitzvah taseh, a mitzvah al taseh. Right. So Sam is kind of on the same line as Elbert here. I'm going to try to answer the question. It's a very deep question. So all the souls were contained in Adam and Eve. All the male souls were contained in Adam, and the female souls were contained in Eve. And that's the reason why they were the sum total of humanity. Now, if they wouldn't have sinned, so the Talmud says we've been born, but it would have been like we were not born. Why? Because the world would have already been in a place of rectification, and we wouldn't have the same job we have now, which is a very deep topic. I kind of hit on it a little bit on a Wednesday class, but the idea that in a certain sense, even though Adam and Chava shouldn't have sinned, but it actually, in a certain sense, worked out better. Why? Because that gave us the free will to do what we had to do. If he would have fixed it and we would have been part of him, right? We would have been part of that. So then we would have just done it as like a add-on. Now that Adam and Chava did the sin, and they fell down, and the world became in a lower state, now we have the ability to do the work ourselves because we live in a world that is not in a perfected state. So the souls were contained in Adam and Eve, and therefore they would have expressed themselves in the world, but in a different reality than in a world that has so many problems, and that we have thereby the obligation to actually fix it up. All right, hope that answers the question. Okay, great. All right, if there's any other questions, we get last licks. Elbert, if I answered you well and Steve answered well, I hope I did. If it doesn't make sense, you could add to it. But this is the idea of the week, and it ties in what we've been doing about personality traits, because it really there's a certain humility to a person to realize that we are limited. And it's not the way people say it. It's always everything in its truth gets misrepresented, and you don't understand it then. This doesn't mean to be a nobody. A human being has to be a person who has ambition, who wants to use his mind and really understand things. That makes us human. At the same time, as you strive more and more and more and use your brain, then you realize, wait a minute, where did this thought arise from? Where does it come from? And then you can become a vessel to get from a higher place. When a person says, I know, then they don't know. They know nothing, because they're stuck where they are. When a person goes and says, okay, I'm just going to receive everything, they don't make the effort, they don't build themselves, they don't do the first 101 of being a human being in this world with a mission in this world. So it's a dynamic of effort, trying, using the human ability of das, of understanding, and at the same time to realize that when you have real understanding is the point where you say, well, the understanding is what God's. And that's why Moshe, who was the smartest and wisest, was also the humblest. All right, guys, all the best. Have a good one. Take care. Bye.